Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Peter Molgaard. I'm going to act as the pro-rector today and take us through this ceremony. Normally, I'm the Dean of Maastricht University School of Business and Economics. Ladies and gentlemen, highly esteemed colleagues, dear Mark, welcome to this academic ceremony in which Professor Dr. Mark Walter Johan Louis Sanders will inaugurate his professorship in international economics here at Maastricht University School of Business and Economics. Clemens Kohl, Professor Dr. Clemens Kohl, the head of the Department of Macro, International and Labor Economics, has recruited Professor Sanders in order to strengthen the international profile of SBE. But Mark is extremely versatile and has already established himself as a leading figure in one of our so-called SDG spearheads that aim to co-create knowledge with societal stakeholders within the areas of sustainable development, digitalization, and globalization. This particular spearhead is called MORS, or in a very long and difficult title, Maastricht Observatory on Resilient, Responsible, and Sustainable Enterprise and Economy. The MORS spearhead wants to rethink societal institutions across resilience, sustainability, and responsibility. Resilience is the institution's ability to absorb and recover from shocks. Sustainability refers to respecting planetary boundaries, and responsibility means that the institution has a triple bottom line. That is, it's concerned with the social and environmental targets in addition to profits. Mark Sanders has chosen to see his inaugural lecture as part of the launch week of MORS. You might ask why. You might also wonder what a professor in international economics has to do with resilience, sustainability, and responsibility. The answers to these two questions have to do with the academic profile of Mark Sanders and as his personality. Let me deal with each in turn. Mark's most cited paper came out only 3 years ago in Small Business Economics in 2018. In joint work with Niels Bosma, Jeroen Content, and Erik Stam, Mark connects institutions, entrepreneurship, and economic growth to explain how entrepreneurship contributes to economic growth. The quality of institutions, financial stability, the size of government, and startup skills combine to make entrepreneurship productive. Now, this paper, entitled Institution, Entrepreneurship, and Economic Growth in Europe, is only indirectly related to resilience, sustainability, and responsibility, one might think, although Professor Sanders might argue differently in a few minutes. If we continue the search for why Morse and Sanders are a good match, let us take a look at another publication. In an article with Robin Koers from Energy Economics in 2013, Professor Sanders investigates how per capita energy consumption is related to gross domestic product, GDP. Contrary to the earlier literature, Koers and Sanders find that greater causality runs from GDP to energy consumption, not the other way around. And this is important, because it means that you can have growth even if you reduce per capita energy consumption. Might I just interject that that the Kingdom of Denmark has done exactly this over the past 40 years. GDP per unit of energy used has gone up at the very least since 1990. For sustainability, this means that a country can grow while it reduces its energy consumption. So we got an essentially Morse component covered. Let's just cover one more before I get to Professor Sanders' personal profile. Resilience. In an intriguing article in the Review of Environmental Economics and Policy from 2019 with Wouter Bortsen and Olivier Deschênes, Mark investigates the economic impact of natural disasters and emphasizes the importance of designing policies that can mitigate the societal effects of disasters, that is, make economies more resilient. Let me cite from the policy conclusion of that paper. So, I quote, "Thus, national governments could, for example, limit disaster impacts through regulations installing prevention measures such as flood protection, and setting up early warning systems. Local governments, like cities, are well positioned to fine-tune disaster risk management policies for local risks through measures such as zoning and building code policies, evacuation planning, and emergency response, unquote. It would seem to me that the floodings of this summer in our region, but also elsewhere at a global level, have underscored the value of this advice. Now that we are satisfied with the academic connection between Morse and Professor Sanders, let me turn to the person Mark. In a sense, I would argue that he also epitomizes Morse at a personal level. He is entrepreneurial, resilient, sustainable, and responsible. And that means also that he's a complex personality. Homegrown at SPE, at New Merit, he's a very independent person and an independent and creative thinker who uses his entrepreneurial skills to grab risky opportunities. An example is how he moved from traditional macroeconomics and international economics to entrepreneurship. He is a liberal in the original sense of the word, disliking status, authority, and hierarchy. And he doesn't much care for formal rules and administrative procedures. However, and this is where the word responsibility comes in, Mark strongly believes in producing public goods, and he's a very collegial academic citizen who contributes to the team and expects other team members also to contribute. His PBL teaching gives much autonomy and responsibilities to students, and this is not always immediately appreciated by the students, who feel that they are operating in an ambiguous setting, making them afraid of low grades. My interpretation is that Professor Sanders is educating his students to become resilient. Grades are a side effect, according to Professor Dr. Sanders. The real purpose of education is personal development. In terms of sustainability, the Sander family's new house, which is really an old Maastricht house, is being made energy neutral. This might not be the most economically rational thing to do, but it follows Mark's conviction. But just maybe Mark doesn't like money. At least not if private banks are involved in the money creation, I understand. He would rather have that be the responsibility of the central banks, so maybe he is in favor of strong government after all. Let us not speculate more, but rather hear from Professor Dr. Mark Sanders himself. The word is yours.
Thank you, Peter, for these kind words and generous introduction. Yes, there were a lot of things you said that I will get back to in my talk. It's my great honor to be here today and speak to you in the same hall where I defended my PhD in February of 2003. And I gladly accept the position of Professor of International Economics. Maastricht has always had a warm spot in my heart, and it's really a joy to see so many familiar faces in this familiar room, in this familiar city, now wearing these familiar colors. I will speak to you today about international economics. Although, as you would probably expect, and Peter already indicated, I'm going to do that in a rather less traditional approach. I think modern science in general, and economics in particular, should be less concerned with traditions and disciplines and more with the real world. Let me start my slideshow as well, because I have some nice slides to support this. The real world. We need to look at the real world. Because if you look outside and if you ask people about the challenges that we face as international community, as international economists, you're not going to hear them say anything about textbook topics like trade, comparative advantage, or global value change. You're going to hear them talk about, I would think, three major challenges that we're facing in the real world. And the first one is climate change, is sustainability. ever since the infamous Club of Rome raised the alarm about the same year I was born, so good 50 years ago. We've come to realize that the international economic system is emitting too much and extracting too much, and this is simply not sustainable. We're overstepping the planetary boundaries, and this has consequences. I should click. So here's the big problems, and it has consequences. We've seen it only this summer. Wildfires in Greece, flooding in Valkenburg, of all places. Overstepping the boundaries of our planetary system, destroying our habitat, has serious consequences. The second challenge, I would say, is inequality. Here, represented by pictures that show where rich and poor meet physically. There's also huge differences between and among countries. This topic has been in the core of international economics since its beginning. Adam Smith wrote an inquiry into the causes and nature of wealth of nations. Nonetheless, it's been put back up on the agenda since the work of Piketty and many others. The gap is growing, and more importantly, his work also shows that in our capitalist liberal market systems, there are no automatic systems to correct for this. And the third challenge, I think is the most important one, and I don't know what it is, because no one knows what it is. It's the great unknowns, the unknown unknowns. It's the next Berlin Wall. It's the next 9/11. It's the next Lehman Brothers. It's the next Fukushima. It's the next COVID crisis. It's the big unknown that's going to change our world forever, and that we cannot prepare for. And to prepare for the unknown is to build an adaptive system, build a resilient economy, an economy in which people and firms can rapidly adjust to new situations. And I believe that when competition in international markets drives us to be profitable and focus on the short run, then the question is, how do we create incentives in that system to build such a resilience? So our future holds enormous challenges, and at the same time, as a society, we've never been better prepared to take on these challenges. We are more people, we are more educated people, we're healthier, we're wealthier than ever before, and we have faced different challenges in the past, and faced them successfully. And that success was not due to grand visions, grand designs, or great economic theories. That success was due to people who basically saw a status quo and refused to accept it, mobilized their talents, mobilized their energy, their resources, the people that I would define as entrepreneurs. People taking initiative, and people that take initiative to do something about a status quo they don't like. And here is where the Prince of Denmark enters. I will refer to Denmark a few more times in my talk. And obviously this is a reference to Shakespeare's Hamlet. But more importantly in this context, it's also a reference to William Baumol's lament in the late 1960s that in mainstream economics the entrepreneur has been ignored. He put it, the Prince of Denmark has been expunged from the discussion of Hamlet. And I think Baumol's reference to Hamlet was even more accurate than he maybe himself anticipated, because Hamlet, we all know, if I ask you to cite something from Shakespeare's Hamlet, you will say, to be or not to be. Well, to be or not to be. And the question Hamlet asks himself there, if you read on, is actually to be or not to be an entrepreneur. It continues, whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. In other words, do I accept the situation as it is, or do I mobilize my talent, my resources, and do something about it? Hamlet chooses to be that entrepreneur. He confronts his uncle who killed his father, then married his widowed mother, and usurped the throne of Denmark. He confronts him, and he pays for it. He pays for it with his life. In the end, the life of his mother and the love of Ophelia. But he is successful in the sense that he avenges his father and takes the rod out of the state of Denmark. And I must say, entrepreneurship scholars, several of them in the room today, have been less successful in challenging the status quo in economics, the status quo that Baumol lamented. A good half century and many brave attempts later, entrepreneurship is still not at the heart of international economics. It's not even in the periphery. But if we want to contribute to our understanding of the challenges of the future, I think that has to change. Schumpeter, I guess the last great entrepreneurship scholar, put entrepreneurship center stage. In his 2010 work, he described the the dynamics of the fundamental dynamics of capitalist system as a process in which entrepreneurs would bring new ideas into reality by bringing products and services into the market. And in that evolutionary process, which he called creative destruction, in that evolutionary process, it's a combination of new ideas and people willing to take up on those ideas. So you need both in that process. Schumpeter stressed the importance of the entrepreneurs, because in his time, the 1910s, you may remember, there were plenty of ideas. There were many new technologies, there were plenty of ideas around, and the big shortage was in people who would take those ideas and introduce them commercially. But then since the 1950s, in traditional and then later modern economic growth theory, the entrepreneur was ignored. They emphasized the generation of new knowledge, the generation of new ideas. And it's not because the scholars in that field denied the existence of entrepreneurship or thought it was not something of the world, but they simply believed that it was not relevant. It was considered to be trivial in the grand scheme of things. If you want to understand long-run growth, why would you care about who takes up the ideas as long as they get taken up? The entrepreneurs were thus expunged from the discussion of Hamlet because they were assumed to do what anyone else could have done in their stead. It's a little bit like the assumption that there's always a worker that you can hire and there's always a capitalist that will invest as long as the price is right. And in our models, there's therefore always an entrepreneur who will take the pigs to market. And this abstraction can be innocent enough if we believe that, if we study long-run economic growth, if we study long-run equilibrium economic growth. Indeed, without new ideas coming up, eventually the farmer has no pigs to take to market. He'll run out of ideas and growth will stop. So there was a focus on the generation of knowledge. But if you only generate new ideas and you don't have the farmer to take the pigs to market, you end up with a crowded pigsty. This abstraction becomes very harmful when we start making policy. So when, for example, you promote new knowledge at the expense of incentives to commercialize that knowledge, you will actually create a pigsty. A lot of ideas that don't get brought into commercial use. Yes, and that is where we've done some work, me and Zoltan Arch, to try and see how that works in a model where we have these two incentives play out against each other. So, where in the models, the traditional models, creating more knowledge would create more growth, we show in our model, and actually I think also what happens in the real world, is that you can actually go beyond the optimum and reduce growth. But more importantly, if we want to model the transition to sustainable, equitable, resilient economies, I think entrepreneurship cannot be considered trivial at all. With the Glasgow Climate Conference starting in a week or so, the newspapers are once more filled with dire scenarios. In Paris, we were all very optimistic. We would limit temperature rises to 1.5 degrees. Last week in a newspaper, if we do everything that we've promised to do, it will be 1.6 by 2050, and it's much more likely that we'll end up with 2.7 or even 3 degrees. If we do not drastically bring down emissions in the next decades, by 2300, I'm probably not going to live to see that. But then sea level rises might actually go up to as much as 15 meters. It'll be pretty crowded in Maastricht if that happens. The UN, meanwhile, last week also, and it's only the news from last week, revealed that if we execute all the plans that we have for extracting fossil fuels, it'll be twice the amount that can be done under the Paris Agreement. So it seems that it is impossible to deal with this challenge. But it's not because there is a shortage of ideas. There's plenty of ideas. Here's just a few technologies that might help us make the transition. We know exactly what the problem is. There is no shortage of knowledge. It's the emission of fossil carbon into the atmosphere. We have bio-based renewable alternatives. What we lack is people that take arms against the sea of trouble and by opposing end them. We need challengers to pick up on these ideas, and in a gale of this creative destruction, I'm citing all these big names before me, destroy the old ways. We need entrepreneurs, and we don't just need them to start up new firms. They are starting up new firms. We don't just need them to start up new firms. We need entrepreneurs also inside existing organizations to push for change from outside and within. And we should better support them when they do this. In a society in which challenging the status quo is the norm, is what we might call the entrepreneurial society. The entrepreneurial society is a term coined by Peter Drucker in the late 1980s and taken up by Professors Aldrich and Turek in their work of 2000s, where they refer to a society that empowers people that challenge the status quo, wherever their talent may be present. And David argued that this entrepreneurial society was kind of forced onto the US because of pressure, because of competitive pressure from Germany, from Japan, who outcompeted the large industries in the United States in the late 60s. And with joint work with Lu Zhang, David and I also showed, I guess in our paper that comes closest to what you might call traditional international economics, we show that that same pressure is also pushing industrialized economies like Europe in that direction, under pressure of East Asian tigers and dragons challenging their position. But I've come to realize that trade and competition is not going to bring us. It's not going to bring us to the entrepreneurial Valhalla. It's going to be. It's going to take more. And in 2016, the Peter Drucker Global Forum. It's a collection of big shots from industry and science talking about management. But they lamented, even in 2016, that the entrepreneurial society had far from fully established itself. So perhaps it's time we take a more proactive stance on this and try to promote that entrepreneurial society, supporting the challenges of the status quo. I think it will help a lot in the transition to a more sustainable economy. I also think it helps a lot in achieving a more inclusive and more equitable society, because it's much more bearable, inequality is much more bearable when we believe that these inequalities are the result of hard work and a fair competition. It's very difficult to visualize these things, so I put these winners on. But it's not only about winning. I also believe that entrepreneurship helps in preparing for the unknown and building a resilient society. We've seen a lot of entrepreneurship in the last year adapting to the COVID crisis. So here you see a few examples: a daycare center, a priest, my colleagues in education who were very entrepreneurial in dealing with a rapidly changing situation. Here things only started to go wrong when bureaucratic managers, I don't like hierarchy, when bureaucratic managers started to recover from the shock and manage our access to the resources. So the question is, how do we get to Denmark? How do we build an entrepreneurial society where our hamlets can take the center stage and play their role? Unfortunately, there's a lot we know about entrepreneurship. Starts with William Baumol, who basically argued that institutions, in general, the man-made rules of the game, drive, let's say, where entrepreneurial talent in society goes. So the institutions in the United States make the entrepreneurial talents in the United States end up as Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, whereas the entrepreneurial talents in Stalin's Russia would end up standing with him on the podium being generals, and in Putin's Russia, you'd end up being a retainer and an oligarch. Baumol's hypothesis basically explains how entrepreneurial talent in society sorts into different activities: productive, unproductive, or even destructive activities. And the implication of his work is that we should just set the institutions right, and the rest would follow. Of course, then the question is, what institutions are the right institutions? What institutions ensure that entrepreneurs can effectively engage in their productive activities? And this was the starting question of a European Horizon 2020 project, again a long title, Financial and Institutional Reforms for the Entrepreneurial Society, that I was honored to coordinate between 2015 and 2018. In this project, we set out to formulate an institutional reform agenda for an entrepreneurial society in Europe. It would take me too long and too far afield, so don't worry, I will not do this, to cite all the interesting and important work that my colleagues in that consortium have done. I could never do it justice in the time I have today. But I can try to summarize it, and I will do that for you. So first, should go back here. First, we identified the main resources that entrepreneurs need. And they are finance, labor, and knowledge. If entrepreneurs have better access, and entrepreneurs in the sense of people challenging the status quo, have better access to finance, labor, and knowledge, they can challenge the status quo more effectively. So we zoomed in on the financial sector, the labor markets, and the knowledge infrastructures, and quickly realized that institutions in Europe co-evolve in a complex historical process, interactively. It's a very complex. So, for example, banking in Italy, it goes back all the way to the Renaissance. It has co-evolved with the Italian state. In Germany, social security is very much tied to its unification, and then I mean the unification the first time in the 18th century and not the second time. Financial resources are allocated differently in Spain than in the UK than in Sweden. It makes no sense to take an institution from the Netherlands and copy it to Greece or the other way around. So, taking this into consideration, the first step in developing an effective reform strategy to empower the entrepreneurial talents involves taking a step back and making a very good analysis of the historical roots of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. That's step one. Step two is that you scan this system carefully for its strengths, its weaknesses, the bottlenecks in it, And we developed several methods, also with Eric, where are you? Over there. With colleagues in FIRES to do this based on data collection. Where are the weaknesses? Where can we improve? What are the strengths we can build on? In step 3, we complement this data analysis because economists tend to do a lot with data and then forget about the qualitative side of the story. So we complemented this data-driven quantitative approach with a qualitative check asking the entrepreneurs in different ecosystems where the barriers to entrepreneurial venturing lie. And that work confirmed that indeed, in different parts of Europe, you have very different barriers. In the UK, and especially London, for example, we found that there's plenty of ideas and entrepreneurs willing to take them up. But these entrepreneurs have a big difficulty getting labor to work for them. And then not so much labor, but rather a well-trained, loyal labor force. Whereas in Germany, you kind of have the flip side of that story. It's very easy to find a disciplined, well-trained, highly educated labor force, but it's very difficult to come up with something new and get that done. In step 4, we triangulate these things. So we want to get a clean diagnosis of what's going on in the ecosystem and how it can be addressed. And then we take our diagnosis and look into the catalog of possible treatments. So triangulate and integrate this information and then have a look at what interventions you might consider. And there we noticed that there is quite a bias in the literature. Much of the evidence is from the United States. Much of the treatments that are being proposed work in the United States. And of course, that will not do. With that caveat in mind, once you have selected your interventions, you need to fit them carefully into the entrepreneurial ecosystem that you're trying to reform, trying to build. So if German politicians, for example, lament the fact that there's so little venture capital in Germany, what they are forgetting is that Germany has a very strong relationship-based banking system that has performed that function maybe for centuries already. So why not build on that? Don't copy the institutions one for one, but look at the functions and try to strengthen the flow of resources to the challengers in your system. Step 6 was then mostly done by actually legal scholars in the consortium who looked at whether the proposed interventions could actually be implemented by the policymakers that have competencies at certain levels, so regional, local, national, or European. And then you get a list of who needs to do what in what order to make the reforms work. And then, of course, and in Maastricht, you should all be glad that I took that from Maastricht. We have a 7 jump, so we need a 7th step, and the 7th step is actually, after you're done, look carefully at what you've done, evaluate it, and go back to step 1 if you're not happy. So this completes the 7 jump, and if you put all of that into a nice animated picture, it looks like this. Now, I hope your eardrums...
In 2015, the European Union was looking for a solution to create more inclusive, innovative, and sustainable growth. Our solution is to rekindle the European entrepreneurial spirit. One size fits no one. Europe is very diverse, so what works in one place might not work in another. We need a tailored reform strategy focusing on mobilising more labour, knowledge and finance for entrepreneurial innovative venturing. In the FIRES project, we've developed 7 steps to get to such a reform strategy. Step 1. What do we build upon? We make an assessment of the most salient features of the institutional landscape in a certain area and trace its deep historical roots. Step 2. What is the current situation? We then map the strengths, weaknesses and flag bottlenecks in the entrepreneurial ecosystem of an area. Step 3. What problems and opportunities do individual entrepreneurs face? Using surveys among entrepreneurial individuals, we identify the most salient features of the startup process and the barriers entrepreneurs encounter. Step 4. Which solutions can be considered? Combine the data analysis of Step 2 with the information from the surveys in Step 3 to select the most suitable interventions from a large research and evidence-based menu of options. Step 5. How to fit the interventions to local preconditions. Carefully consider this short list of proposals in light of the historical routes assessed in Step 1 and fit the proposed interventions and reforms to the local, regional and/or national institutional landscape. Step 6. Who can and should do what to ensure success. Identify who should change what, in what order, for the reform strategy to have its maximum effect. Step 7. How do we maintain entrepreneurial success? A healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem is never finished. Policymakers should experiment, evaluate and learn. And return to Step 1 for a next iteration of possible reforms. In 7 steps, we can take Europe to a more inclusive, innovative and sustainable future. Learn more at projectfinance.eu.
Right. Now, to give you a bit of an idea of the kind of interventions that we came up with, that we proposed in this project, I'll discuss 3 at some more length. And recall that the aim of these proposals was not to promote new firm formation and traditional entrepreneurship policy goals. It's the aim was to channel more resources and give more access to knowledge, labor and finance for challenging the status quo. Okay, so the first set of reforms would limit intellectual property rights and patent protection. And that might sound counterintuitive at the beginning, because isn't it the case that intellectual property rights are designed to serve the interest of the innovators? And that's not true. They were not designed. They co-evolved like any other institution. And by now, arguably, they serve the interest of large incumbent firms as opposed to small challengers. The reason is that patents are currently, they're legal protection. If you hold a patent, you can sue infringers. And that means that those with a strong legal department can do this effectively, and those who lack such a department cannot. So the large incumbent firms with their strong legal representation and deep pockets, they go after the challengers that threaten their business. And those considering threatening their business discount this into their decision to even try. Effectively, the access to knowledge is blocked. And so what we propose, for example, is the right to squat a patent. If someone has a patent but is not using it to create a product, then you can actually go in and violate that property right for a good social reason. I'm a bit of a, anyway. Alternatively, you could also force patent holders to put up a price in advance instead of negotiate a share of the profits ex post. It's like we do that with many products, so why not with intellectual property rights? It would already assure a much easier access to knowledge for challengers of the status quo. The second reform, dear to my heart, and only last week in the Volkskrant, I want you to meet Annemarie van Krimpen. She's here on the picture. I don't know if you read the piece op ten eerste. It was a one-page article in which a social security beneficiary, Annemarie, she explained how she did not dare to date again for fear of losing her entitlements and being fined. And this is wrong in so many ways I can't begin. But what it shows you is that it takes away people's initiative. She's not taking the initiative to improve her life. She's not challenging her status quo anymore. And so what we propose in the FIRES project is to make these kind of entitlements less conditional, unconditional. For simplicity, you may want to call it a basic income. It's not meant to, again, it's not meant to promote new firm formation, although I suspect it actually doesn't hurt in that department, but it gives challengers of the status quo a firm basis to work from and a stronger position in attracting and retaining the labor they need. Basic income is an old idea. It's not my idea. I'm not going to claim it. It goes back to Roman times, actually, I learned recently. But actual experiments and empirical evidence on how such a system would work are lacking or rare. And the political struggle that preceded doing an experiment, and actually rather not very ambitious experiment, field experiment in Utrecht with unconditional welfare benefits, it has taught me that building a coalition for an entrepreneurial society is actually a hard thing to do. So I really hope that the 2019 Nobel Prize for Duflo, Banerjee and Kramer, and then this year's Nobel for Guido Imbens, will convince our policymakers that more extensive and carefully designed experiments are called for, especially since Imbens showed, and also our own experiment in Utrecht showed, that the effects, the negative impacts of basic income that people fear are simply not supported by the facts. And then the final proposal, and it's also a proposal that's strongly advocated by colleagues at the Sustainable Finance Lab as a measure to improve the sustainability and resilience, if you want, of the financial sector itself, is to limit the fiscal advantages for debt finance. That again might strike you as counterintuitive, because if we limit the fiscal advantages of debt finance, that means we have less cheaper loans, and cheaper loans are what we need, right? Would the cheaper loans not also benefit the challenges of the status quo? Because we know the challenges of the status quo are always starved of capital. But the problem with subsidizing debt finance is that it's the problem for challenges of the status quo for entrepreneurs is not access to debt. There's enough debt. In Dutch, het geld klotst over de plinten. It's for free. It does not flow to the entrepreneurs. And there's good reasons for that. As with patents, the subsidization of debt finance benefits primarily the large incumbent firms. They have the long track records, they have the strong balance sheets, they have the solid collateral. They can get access to the debt. The small and young firms, the unestablished organizations, they cannot. They rely on equity, and if they can't get equity, they'll lend it from family, friends, and fools. So unproductive lending is perhaps privately profitable. It's socially not very valuable anymore. There is no good reason for continuing the subsidization of debt when debt is financing the status quo. And the FIRES project was quite fundamental in shaping my thinking about doing problem-based research. I'm going to launch that new term here today, problem-based research. We do problem-based learning in Maastricht. We're also going to do problem-based research. So on the one hand, more applied research forces us in a natural way to think across disciplinary boundaries, because in the FIRES project we had historians, we had legal scholars, we had geographers, and the sum of the parts made the whole bigger than the sum of the parts. That's the expression. And it also meant I needed to challenge my own discipline. So bringing entrepreneurship into the core of mainstream economic thinking, of international macroeconomics, that remains an ambition I share with my FIRES colleagues. And I think making that case, the case that entrepreneurship is not trivial, is much easier when we focus on addressing real-world challenges. The same problem-based research that we did in the FIRES project, I hope to continue with over 70 colleagues here at Maastricht University in the new Maastricht Observatory on Responsible, Resilient and Sustainable Societies, Economies and Enterprises. Peter, you forgot one. but for short Morse. And there I will try to convince René that entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurial society are a vital element, answer, I would say, to bringing a sustainable entrepreneurship, a sustainable society closer. And I will try to convince Anne, who's heading the pillar on responsibility, that responsible leadership and responsible business is about nurturing and promoting entrepreneurship, also from within. And in my own pillar on resilience, we work on the impact of financial systems, industrial structures, and entrepreneurship on the local economy's resilience to extreme weather shocks. And there are projects, Jaap, we still have to finish, very old, on institutional quality and natural hazard shocks, but also setting up exciting new collaborations with the Open University and people at FASOS on how policymakers and decision makers can develop more effective responses to shocks. With old friends, new colleagues, we've started projects to introduce planetary boundaries, physical feedback effects, and more accurate empirical description of consumer behavior in agent-based models. And out of the Inner Paths project, we're still going to be developing several interesting papers on how you can bring equity and debt, the difference between equity and debt finance, actually into the macro energy models that we use to model the energy transition. And that's only the projects I'm directly involved in. There's still colleagues Nielsen, Bos, Versluis, Strijbig, Van der Laar, Turkeli, Siegel, Curvers in my resilience pillar who will come up with several projects more on inclusiveness, finance, politics, trade, education, labor, and migration. I think we're set to revolutionize economics. I really truly believe that resilience can be the new competitiveness, like sustainability must become the new efficiency, and responsibility is the new profitability. The energy transition, climate adaptation, financial instability, and the host of unanticipated shocks will make sustainable, resilient, and responsible firms and societies an asset in our current economic models, and theories have a hard time accounting for it. So this puts our current economic models in crisis. Being efficient, competitive, and profitable today means operating in highly fragmented global value chains, financing your operations with cheap debt, employing only just enough cheap labor on temporary contracts preferably, and cautiously guarding your intellectual property rights. That is the model of the past. It will no longer do. Such practices make people, firms, and society conservative, reactive, and in the end, more vulnerable to shocks. An entrepreneurial society is more innovative in normal times, it's more resilient in a crisis, and it's more inclusive under all circumstances. So with Peter Drucker and William Baumol and David Aldrich, I say, let Hamlet take the stage. And this is where he takes a bow and you all applaud. And then there is, of course, I don't know how we're doing on time, but there is the tradition that at the end of your inaugural lecture you thank some people. And I have a lot of people to thank, so I need a lot of time to do it. So first of all, I would like to thank the rector and the College of Deans at Maastricht University for their confidence in me and for offering me this position and their belief that I can actually make a contribution to this excellent institution. And I will do everything in my power to be worthy of their trust. And I owe a lot more to Maastricht University, so I would like to thank Johan Muisken. So here's the, Johan Muisken and Adriaan van Zon, who, 18, 19 years ago in this room, sent me off into the world with all the luggage I needed to become an academic. Thank you very much. Johan could not be here today because he's in Friesland with his grandchildren, enjoying his time there. So it's a very good reason, but I'm very glad that Adriaan is here in good health. It's great to see you. I also thank my many colleagues at the Mile department, several old faces, new faces. You all made me feel at home in a year where that was far from obvious that could be done. So thank you very much for that, and I hope for a wonderful collaboration in the future. And then there is a special word of thanks to Clemens Kool, who actually, well, I've been looking through where we've been in the past, Clemens, except for the fact that you were at the CPB for 1 year and I was in Jena for a year. You have always been my mentor and boss, and again. And I have been very glad that you have been. I'm probably not the easiest person to be responsible for. You were always there, to have my back. Wait, I had a few things here. So when I started in 1991, you were already there. Of course, the Maastricht Treaty, and Clemens was one of the few, I guess, who warned us against the problems that we were getting into. Then studying in Maastricht, then as Dean at Utrecht School of Economics, joining SFL, and now we're colleagues again, and it's always been my pleasure. You pushed me when it was needed. You celebrated my successes when it was appropriate. You warned me when I would get into trouble, and then shook your head smilingly when I did, anyway, get into trouble. But what is most amazing is that you never gave up on me, and that I very much appreciate. Then there's David. Where's David? There's David. My mentor. You literally picked me up from the streets in Utrecht when I was out of a job, thinking what to do with my life. You took me to Jena, to your fabulous place there, and that has had an enormous impact. I spent only 9 months there, but it had an enormous impact on my career, as you have seen in this presentation. Thank you so much for supporting me and many, many, many others with your enthusiasm and passion for the field. There's also a big thank you for my colleagues at Utrecht School of Economics. I'll look at Eric. I will leave Utrecht School of Economics end of the week, final. And all the people there, Jan Reinders, the first steps, Eric, my last steps, thank you so much for supporting me. I dare not list all of you by name, because I would be overlooking people and that would be embarrassing. But all the colleagues inside and outside of Utrecht School of Economics, thank you very much for an enormously productive and pleasant collaboration. You can take me out of Utrecht School of Economics, but you cannot take Utrecht School of Economics out of me. Then there's a few people that I would like to thank for enriching my career and life, keeping an eye on the real world. They're not here today, but I hope they're looking at the live stream, the people at D66 and the Vermeerder Stichting. I've enjoyed very much thinking about how to make good academic ideas practical for politics and how to take political dilemmas, let's say, back into my academic work. And Sustainable Finance Lab, where we also share the mission of trying to bridge the gap between theory and practice. I've enjoyed it tremendously, and it was a wonderful trip in the last years. So my thanks go to the members for very interesting discussions, but also to the core team for many more things. Herman, Peter, and Klaas, I would like to thank you by name for setting it up. Rens, Thomas and Diewertje, I would like to thank you for keeping it going. And please continue to do so in the future. I also want to thank my colleagues at the FIRES Consortium. There's only a few of them here today, but working with you all has been an honor and a privilege. I learned a lot from each and one of you, and I want to thank you for putting up with the slings and arrows of an outrageous coordinator. I want to thank you finally, my students, those of you who are here or watching. My main message to you would be, if you're wondering, what is the main message of this talk? Go and challenge the status quo wherever you end up, and challenge your professor. My hope is with you for the future. And then my family and friends. I'm going to switch to Dutch for that. And I have to go through all these things that I forgot to click. There you see. Lieve vrienden. Het betekent meer voor me dan woorden kunnen uitdrukken dat jullie er vandaag hier weer zijn. Ik heb jullie te weinig gezien de afgelopen jaar. Dat is logisch. Maar het is wel... Nou ja, het is goed om te weten dat als je samen je hoogtepunten viert, dat je er dan ook voor elkaar bent in de dieptepunten. En die zekerheid is ontzettend belangrijk voor me. En dan lieve familie. Pap, mam, de basis die jullie hebben gelegd daar is, dankjewel, wel een beetje karig voor. Toch, dankjewel. En de komende maand vieren we dat jullie 50 jaar getrouwd zijn. En ik heb van die 50 jaar op 6 maanden na, geloof ik, de hele periode mogen meemaken. In die tijd hebben jullie een gezin gesticht en ons het leven voorgeleefd. Elk op je eigen manier, maar wel als team. Dus mam, van jou heb ik meegekregen dat je soms gewoon je tanden ergens in moet zetten. Niet tevreden moet zijn met een beetje goed. Het moet gewoon zo, het moet gewoon kloppen. En ik denk dat voor die eigenschap de oude participatiecrashes in Utrecht je nog steeds dankbaar zijn. En pap, van jou heb ik dan meegekregen, om het een beetje in balans te houden ook, dat er soms verschillende kanten zijn aan een verhaal en dat je af en toe ook best eens een compromis mag sluiten. En dat niemand de waarheid in pacht heeft. En dat is als wetenschapper toch je grondhouding. Jos, Vanessa, Maaike, Arjan, het is fantastisch, we komen uit hetzelfde nest en we zijn toch heel anders opgegroeid en uit dat nest gekomen. En ook ongelooflijk leuk om te zien hoe onze eigen nesten er dan toch heel anders uitzien. Maar die basis die eronder ligt, die is hetzelfde en die is onverwoestbaar. Ik ben heel trots op jullie en ik hoop jullie vandaag ook een beetje op mij. Sil en Thijs, we zijn er ook erbij. In jullie nest was ik welkom vanaf dag 1. En het was niet onder de gemakkelijkste omstandigheden. Dus dank daarvoor. Die wispelturige snotblag die ik toen was en die wispelturige snotblag die ik nu nog steeds ben, hebben jullie altijd genomen zoals ik ben. En gesteund in wat ik deed. Me ongezouten de waarheid gezegd als dat nodig was. Blijf dat alsjeblieft doen. Luca en Milo, mijn lieve kindertjes. Als er van mijn verhaal vandaag iets bij jullie zou mogen beklijven, dan is het hoop ik dat jullie je door mij gesteund voelen als je eens een keer de status quo ter discussie wilt stellen. Om een groot onrecht aan te pakken of gewoon een goed feest te organiseren. Ik kan moeilijk hier een heel pleidooi houden voor toegang tot geld, kennis en arbeid voor ondernemers als ik jullie die steun vervolgens ontzeg. Dus ik sta altijd voor jullie klaar met mijn kennis, mijn arbeid, en mijn geld. En dank Sarah voor te veel om op te noemen. Want iedereen weet hier wel dat zonder jou mijn leven in 2 dagen een enorme rokende puinhoop zou zijn. Dus met jouw oog voor detail, je focus op wat echt belangrijk is, feilloze intuïtie, genadeloze kritiek Het is me allemaal even lief. Ik hou van je. En ik heb gezegd. Je ziet je dus.
It would have been appropriate that the thanks had remained up there, because I want to thank you for a very, very strong tour de force, I would say, of international economics, what it has to do with entrepreneurship, resilience, sustainability, and you did that in a very engaging way. So I think it's a very humble lineage that you lined out, from Adam Smith over Joseph Schumpeter to William Baumol and David Aldrich to yourself. And I think it's good to have that ambition to enrich the field of international economics with entrepreneurship. We need that. And I think it's also clear, I couldn't help noting that you named Peter Drucker at least 3 times in your speech, which is, I would say, unusual for classical international economics, isn't it? So it bodes well for your collaboration, I think, within the School of Business and Economics, that you reach out in that way to the business side. And I think that's also clear that we have very many people here at the School of Business and Economics who would like to collaborate with you. But also outside of the school, I'm sure that members of other faculties will enjoy working with you, and that you have that capability of recreating international economics with entrepreneurship, but also, and congratulations to you, Mark, but also to Mors, with you as a force within Mors. And of course, I couldn't help but enjoying to see Denmark mentioned 3 times as well, coming from that humble kingdom. And I think we should get Hamlet, revive Hamlet, and make him take center stage. So with that, congratulations, and also to you, Mark, but also to the School of Business Economics and to Mors for having a new professor of international economics. And with that, I want to close this academic ceremony and tell you that there is, now we as a group of people will what's that called? The cortege, thank you. We'll leave first, and then there is a reception in the Refter. And if you don't know where that is, then just follow the cortege. That would be the name of the game. Thank you very much.